I'm Brandon Dawson, and this is The Distiller, a podcast about how we find meaningful work and how we find meaning in the work we do. Welcome to our 2018 Year in Review episode. We thought about calling it a best of episode, but that didn't really feel right. It's a review, a look back at year one of The Distiller. Every 2 weeks, just about every 2 weeks, with one minor delay during the year, we've talked with different guests about their search for meaningful work, about how they found what they do, or how the work found them. 52 weeks, 26 episodes, and yes, our most recent episode was number 27. That's because there was no episode 13. Episode 14 guest, Derek Dos Anjos, jokingly requested that he not be Unlucky 13, so we skipped number 13. Just over a year ago, I sat down with my friend Justin Golden over beers to talk about our work. Maybe you have somebody in your life with whom you have that "what am I doing with my life" conversation. It seems like Justin and I have that conversation about every couple years. And I've told this story before in the show, but it bears repeating because it's the story of how the show started. I asked Justin that day, if you knew everything you know about me, except what I do for a living, what would you guess I do? That question was an attempt to say, am I doing the right thing? Does what I'm doing make sense for who I am? And Justin did answer the question, and his answer confirmed for me that he knew me well and knew what I value and that my life's work is headed in the right direction. His answers challenged me to try to continue to push my work closer to both the things that are important to me and the things I'm best at, the things that are closest to my heart and to my skill set. But Justin also said, here's what I want you to do. He said, I want to hear you have the conversations you and I have with other people. I want to hear how other people think about their work and hear you ask the questions of them that you ask of me. And it was out of that conversation that the Distiller Podcast was born. Since that time, like I said, we've recorded 26 episodes at 26 different locations, 32 different guests. The first episode came out December 16th, 2017, and that first episode featured Danny Corman talking about the end of his nearly a decade-long run owning the Green General Store Park and Vine and moving not only into new work but across the country to Colorado. That conversation was recorded at the Anchor in Cincinnati's historical Over the Rhine neighborhood. Since that first episode, format hasn't really changed much. The core of our approach, real conversations largely unedited with people in real places, has remained consistent. So this show isn't a best of, it is a year in review. It's an uneven compilation of some of my favorite moments from our first year, chosen kind of at random. We're not trying to bring everything in or have clips of every show. Apologies to those guests or locations who may not be represented here. Some of the best conversations, frankly, just wouldn't be reduced to a clip or a soundbite, like that first conversation with Danny Corman, or seeing the tears well up in Libby Hunter's eyes when I asked her whether she has mentors for her work and her relating that her two mentors had both passed in the last year. But where possible in this show, I just wanted to look back and remember some of my favorite moments from our first year of shows. There are a lot of different things that make a conversation memorable. We posted recently on social media and asked people what their favorite moments were from the first year, and we got some great responses. Certainly one of my favorite things about the show is when a guest's response completely catches me off guard. Like, for instance, and unsurprisingly, Dom and Judy Lopresti, owners of Spun Bicycles. I talked to them in our second episode, and we started out talking about the value of great customer service, but quickly went in a direction I absolutely did not expect.
I hate hard sales and people who would just want to sell a bike they have on the floor to get it out. You know, that's not what we do.
We see it a lot. We see a lot of people, they come walking in with a bike that obviously was sold to them because it was on the floor. It might not fit them.
Sure, it fits you. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
You just wanted it off your floor. And this one poor lady had been riding this road bike and killing mileage on it on a bike that was 2 sizes too small for her.
Yeah.
And she was assured, oh, this is the right size for you. And I actually had one of Judy's old carbon frames that had very low mileage on it, and I gave her a cherry of a deal on it. Mm-hmm. And it was 2 sizes bigger. She's like, are you sure it's going to fit me? I'm like, this is the size bike you're supposed to be riding.
Yeah.
And
feel the difference.
We built it up, and she's like, oh my God, my neck pain's gone away instantly, my shoulders.
Crouched over, hunched over.
Yeah, and now she's faster, she's more efficient, and I got a free pedicure out of it. Awesome.
I did not expect that story to go that direction.
And I got butterfly pink. Wasn't it? It was an awesome color.
I love those guys. And not surprisingly, that remains our most downloaded episode of the year, even though it was only our second. Sometimes the unexpected answer has more to do with motivation. When I asked Chef Derek Dos Anjos about what defines and sets him apart in his approach to running his restaurant, The Anchor OTR, I really expected his answer to be something about the things he learned starting out in the restaurant business in New York, or maybe something special in his menu, or how he creates such a welcoming physical atmosphere. But his answer, again, caught me off guard. What skill do you have that you have always had that you sort of bring to what you do that makes you successful?
I'm compassionate.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I say really because that's not the answer I might have expected. Drive, or I might have expected
I think at the end of the day, there are a lot of people that come through your door, employees or customers, that have either had a bad day or things aren't going quite their way, or either they're gonna sit down, order a plate of food, and have an experience that makes them feel better. On the back end of it, if it's an employee, if you can develop a relationship with someone where you care for them, they're going to care for you, and their work is going to be better, and they're going to produce what you tell them to produce.
Right on. I love that answer. Our idea is pretty simple. The reasons why and how people do the work they do are always interesting. We spend enough of our time working that there's always an interesting thread to be found, even if that thread is dissatisfaction or disillusionment. One of the best places to start is how people got into the work they do. And maybe my favorite "how did you get into this" moment of the year was talking with poet Matt Hart, who teaches at the Art Academy of Cincinnati. Matt was describing the connection between singing in punk bands as a teenager, not that he's stopped. His band Never Knew just played the Northside Tavern down the road from my house a few nights back. So if you're into that, I encourage you to check out both Matt's poetry and his music. But anyway, Matt described one experience while in college that opened the door to a lifetime of creative work. And let me just say, as the host, anytime you get someone spontaneously reciting Etheridge Night on a Sunday afternoon in an empty bar on Cincinnati's west side, you know you're doing something right. And quick warning, if you're listening with the kids, the poem Matt recites contains some strong language. Just a warning.
I went to college at Ball State in Muncie, Indiana. Mm-hmm. I studied philosophy because I couldn't figure out anything else I really wanted to study.
Yeah.
And while I was there, I took a poetry class. And I took it on a lark because I thought it would help me write better song lyrics. I mean, the band was going strong at that point. This poetry class was really amazing and eye-opening to me, but there were these young guys in the class who called themselves the smaller Midwestern poets. Uh-huh. And they would put on readings around campus. And I remember they put on this reading, and for whatever reason, they liked me, so they started inviting me to these things. And I went to one of them, and there's this young guy. He had a beard and a flannel shirt on, and stood up in front of everybody and said, and he was all of like 22 years old,
yeah.
And said, I've decided I'm no longer going to read any of my poems in public. I'm only going to read the work of other people. Tonight I'm going to read 2 poems by Etheridge Knight, and this one's called Feeling Fucked Up.
Uh-huh.
And just launches into it, and I remember thinking, that's a poem?
You can do that?
Like, you can do that? Because, that poem begins, Lord, she's gone, done, packed up and split, and I with no way to make her come back. Bright bone white, crystal sand glistens, dope, death, dead, dying and jiving, drove her away, made her take her laughter and her softness and her midnight sighs. And then from there launches into this litany of FUs to everything but to Coltrane and alligators and birds in the sky and Nixon and Mao and Nkrumah. And then at the very end he says, fuck the whole motherfucking thing. All I want now is my woman back so my soul can sing. Oh, wow. And so, the thing I responded to at the time was the sort of ferociousness of it, mm-hmm. the irreverence of it, the irreverence of the language, and the volume, the violence.
The punk rock.
The punk rock
yeah.
edge, right? But now it's like all these years later, having studied poetry, like it's a prayer. Lord,
Wow.
she's gone, done left, done packed up and split, right? And at the end, it's this sort of plea for things to be righted, to have
I just want her
the
back.
beloved back, right?
Yeah.
So all that litany of FUs in the middle is somebody who's in total pain throwing a fit.
Yeah.
Right? And stomping around. And you can actually hear like the clatter of that language, bright bone, white, crystal, sand, glistens, dope, death, dead, dying and jiving, all those hard consonants, banging around. And that just like, it changed everything. And the next day was the first time I sat down to try to write a poem without a prompt, without anybody asking me to write one.
Yours.
And I've been doing that pretty much every day for, 30 years plus.
That's powerful stuff, and it still gives me goosebumps to hear Matt launch into that poem. And if it wasn't evident, he didn't have that written down. That's just inside of him. One of the consistent themes on this show is mastery. How do people get good at what they do, whatever their work? What's involved in learning a specific skill or a trade or art? And how do we go from novice to master in our field? I wondered, was there a common theme to that journey? Well, for tech entrepreneur Mark Bowles, the formula for success comes down to perseverance. Mark has been wildly successful as one of the founders of EcoATM, and today is a startup consultant and angel investor in Southern California. It's easy to look at someone like Mark and think that his success is about a particular talent or insight that makes him successful. But Mark spoke really honestly about the value of perseverance, about the balance needed between the qualities that have contributed to his success and how those same qualities expressed differently can be the very things that might stand in the way of someone else's success.
My success at this thing is just really a numbers game, and I'm a barnacle. I just stick with stuff, and I have perseverance, and I go back and I'm not smarter than most people. I'm not more technical or more, but I work really hard, and I stay with it like a barnacle. And that really turns out to be a lot of what separates success from failure in this particular startup game, because it is so harsh, like I said, and it bucks a lot of people off. And you just don't want to go do it again. Yeah. And I don't know any better. I just, once I get strapped into the harness, I just pull against the leather until something happens, right?
Do you think that's just true of life? I mean, so I've experienced in the entertainment industry, there's all these industries where there's these discussions of talent or intelligence or some X factor that's the differentiator between the people that make it and people that don't. And the older that I get, I actually think it has nothing to do with any of that. It's luck and hard work.
It's luck and hard work, exactly.
And
it sounds
perseverance.
cliche, and when you say it, it doesn't really mean anything when people hear it. Like, oh yeah, luck and hard work. But it really is the thing. And I don't even know how to say those words in a way that doesn't sound cliche where people are, because I find myself saying, and it sounds self-serving too, yeah, I work really hard. But it's the truth. That is the thing that separated me from way smarter people than me. Mm-hmm. That is and there's also a fine line too, because there's a really fine line between being a persevering, hardworking, stick-to-it entrepreneur and just a totally irresponsible jackass, right? Because
where you can't listen to all the factors that are saying no.
Yeah, and sometimes it is time to give up and go, and sometimes, there's a balance with, you've got other responsibilities. You get your family and mm-hmm. Your all that. So you got to balance those things, and it really becomes quite hard. And again, it's not for everybody, but yeah, luck and hard work.
Yeah, well, no, and it sounds like... It might seem a little strange to compare a technology entrepreneur to a guy who builds tree houses for a living, but my conversation with Mark Bowles does occupy a similar place in my mind as the time I spent with Django Kroner. Django is the founder of the Canopy Crew. Yes, Django builds tree houses for a living, and we had a lot of fun talking about the kind of whimsical nature of his business, about the spiritual impact of being able to live and work in the forest canopy. But Django is also a businessman, much to his surprise these days. He's a small business owner who's had to learn the ropes quickly as he went along. And that process of dogged determination, of belief in yourself, is similar. Django spent his teenage years as a rock climber in the Red River Gorge in Kentucky, and he described the process of learning to run a business as analogous to solving a particularly challenging climb.
Being an entrepreneur is so much more than I ever thought it could possibly be. Obviously, you kind of gravitate towards things that you're good at, and then you specialize, and then you get used to being good at everything that you do, because people don't challenge themselves that often. With the Canopy Crew, I found myself repeatedly smacked down and, kind of put in my place. And that process it's endless, because businesses by nature grow. And when growth happens, growing pains occur. And then it's my duty to respond to those growing pains. So I had no idea what I was doing. I still don't, but in the beginning, certainly zero idea at all. And I just approached it like I approached rock climbing. When I was rock climbing a lot, I was project climbing. So I would pick a really difficult route, just one path up one cliff, and I'd spend a month working on it. So it would take 300 tries over a month of repeatedly going up and falling, and like a dance, you learn the exact precision moves until you get it, until you can get to the top without falling. So I understood the process of being really stubborn and just not stopping and not giving up. And I understood the process of things happen once you stop trying to force them. So whether or not you're supposed to apply those to business, I don't know, but I did. As a climber, I was always okay to be bold and take risks, and I loved being the person who would just go for it. And that's exactly what I've done here. And it's totally backfired a number of times, but it's also my one and only secret ingredient that has got me here. So plenty of people have criticized that mentality or questioned it, certainly. I mean, even in my own crew. But at the end of the day, that's that's just who I am.
We talked with a lot of creative people this year, people who are adept at speaking about how and why the creative work they do impacts them as people. When you ask someone, why do you do what you do? And they're really honest and reflective, you get some truly arresting moments. And no discussion this year went deeper, faster, than my conversation with Rich Hordinsky and David Wilcox about their musical and professional collaboration that spanned 20 plus years. And there's no better example of someone who thinks deeply about the why of their work than singer and songwriter David Wilcox.
I had to smile when I was talking to a singer-songwriter, and she was saying that the real reason why people choose to be singer-songwriters is because it is so difficult to fling your soul out to a bunch of strangers and feel some people get it and most people reject it. And the reason why that's a valid choice for a life is because what you get to practice is not trying to sell people on what you do. What you get to practice is digging a deeper well to know who you are that would not be required if you had a job that was something predictable. So the fascinating part about putting yourself in a vulnerable position to be criticized for your very personality, for your very essence, is a wise choice if you take it as intentional instead of it being an obstacle, instead of, boy, if I could only get everyone to like me. That's not the point. The point is, how can I...
Wait, that's not the point.
I've been doing it wrong.
Can we rewind?
So this woman was saying that the real beauty of the choice is that this side effect of strengthening your sense of worth apart from what other people think of you it gets exercised most of all. It's sort of like if you went into the weight room and you said, well, I'm here to move weights, where do you want them? And they say, no, they just go up and down. You don't really move them anywhere. Really? Well, why are we doing this? Well, you don't change the weights change you. So I love that about the difficulty of music, and so that to me is the real payoff. That's the part you keep. The fact that it is humbling. It's a very humbling craft.
In a similar way, piano technician and tuner Nevin Essex brought a deep thoughtfulness to our conversation. We talked about building a career in a field that is kind of limited. It's not growing. There aren't many people who do what Nevin does, and even fewer who do it with the experience and the care and the expertise that he brings to it. I asked Nevin when we spoke about his awareness of the landscape around him, about the decline of trades and craftsmen, and how that awareness shapes his sense of his work. But his response was another of these lovely surprises, a response filled with hope and magic and true love for what he does.
Well, what I see is that a lot of craft people are being replaced by Home Depot and that kind of thing. A lot of craft people go to work at Rockler and Woodcraft and places where they can make something at least for their work. But I have to say, what I experience that's different, I think, is that our work is about what's in the imagination. Music is in between your ears, right? Now, I know boat builders, the boat has to float. But when you go walk on a new boat that somebody just built, it stimulates your imagination.
Yeah.
If somebody builds a kitchen, you have to put pots and pans in it. But it's so beautiful that you just stand there and look at it in awe. And what we do is about music, and music is very complex language. It's the culture talking to its people, people communicating with each other in very subtle ways through music. And it's meant to be in your imagination. The whole purpose of it is to reach your imagination. So when I work on a piano, I can't just think of it as a machine. It's a how do I say this? When I was a kid, I would listen to my dad's Heathkit radio and listen to the funny little sounds that the airport would send out, ding, 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 and it stimulated my imagination. I started playing like I was on a spaceship. It would make me want to play with it. Well, what do pianists do? They play, right? So the sounds that this thing makes are meant to reach the imagination. And so I'm always thinking about that. That's what I get up in the morning and go do. So try to make an instrument a part of your imagination.
Yeah. Perhaps my single favorite conversation of the year was with Cincinnati photographer Michael Wilson. Partly because we met at Arnold's Bar and Grill, which just seemed like the perfect setting for the Distiller, one of the oldest bars in certainly Cincinnati and in America. If I could wish for a permanent home for the podcast, Arnold's would probably it. But also, just because Michael is Michael, this episode was special to me. Michael's approach to his work is so wonderfully pure, and the way he talks about it is so beautiful and simple that I just got lost in our conversation. There are many moments of this year of talking about craft and about the specifics of how someone does their job. Talking with Michael about how he makes pictures, how he finds material, how he's chasing the work through more and less meaningful situations, he describes it all beautifully. Let's talk a little bit about how you work, because I think my sense originally was you get a commission. I mean, you've done a lot of studio portraiture, some of it on album covers and some of it not. But it sounds to me like just as much of your work is just wandering around the neighborhood, taking a lot of photographs and finding something beautiful.
I think you're exactly right. And the interesting word there is work. I mean, if it's like if photography is this sort of like thing I'm following, this shepherd I'm following, it's like certain times I've found myself following that shepherd into places where I'm doing a dance that I'm paid to dance, other times I am just like dancing just because I'm so happy to be someplace, just like, and I think both are valuable things. Like thank goodness there are like firms even in Cincinnati that maybe there will be maybe they're financial advisors and they want someone to come in and make pictures of all their employees, and I go in and I'll do that in as honest as in as careful way as I can. That's very that is work as a photographer, but that's not, I can't sustain that for very long without the moments that you were sort of describing, where I am going and sort of like listening to the world, just sort of like.
Is that a practice that you have? Is there any intention or rhythm to how many days
a
week you just go out with your camera?
No, and sadly, there was a time when you couldn't have stopped me from putting film in the camera and walking. And now that is not the case. But once the film is in the camera and my feet are underneath me and I'm on the sidewalk, I feel the same. I know this is what I do. So I have, over the years, I've used different artificial, I guess, architectures. Like I've walked certain streets. Like more recently, I've been photographing State and Beacon streets on the west side of Cincinnati. And I will just walk, not to say anything about that neighborhood, but just it's a place I know, and I can just... Unfortunately, sometimes people ask me to like sort of like recently a mutual friend, Rich Hordinsky, asked me to sort of take that sort of sensibility to the neighborhood that he lives in, Walnut Hills. So I've just been, and that feels really good. I don't know if the pictures are any good, but I know that when I've been walking these streets and just, it's this, active listening, I guess, with your eyes. It feels like no one benefits from this. No, but it feels like this is the one thing I do that makes sense. And which is weird. I can't quite square those things. But like, why does the one thing that makes total sense to me, like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, no one benefits from this?
That last statement, that even a photographer of Michael's ability with Michael's body of work feels deeply the tension between the work he loves the most and the work the world values the most, that is as simple and clear a picture of what we struggle with in our work every day as I could possibly paint. When you talk about meaningful work, there are a couple of different things that can mean. Of course, it can equal broader meaning or societal impact, and for some of our guests, it did. But it also has to do with work that's meaningful or fulfilling to us as we do it. Throughout the year, I've been fascinated to hear people talk about whether their work is meaningful to them and in what ways. And maybe my favorite moment of the show so far along this theme was talking with Megan Trischler. Megan is the project coordinator for People's Liberty. And I talked to her about what it means to be a creative. She's a visual designer and a deep creative force whose work is primarily about facilitating other people's creativity. Is that fulfilling to her, or does it just highlight the areas of her own work that aren't getting enough attention? How does, because you are a creative person at heart, that's what you're trained in, yet your work right now is facilitating creative work from other people.
Totally.
How does that work for you? Do you feel like you are doing enough of your own work, or are you just putting all that energy into making other people's creative dreams happen?
Man, yeah, you have really distilled one of my biggest challenges right now is that we are the platform for other people's creativity.
Right.
And so my work is creating those spaces and those platforms for other people to do what they want to do. And in my heart of hearts, I'm a doer as well. So I would say that I've developed a lot of side projects lately that I do outside of my 9 to 5, which I think has been good because it allows my 9 to 5 to just be what it is and let it be that. And then I've been trying to do a number of other creative projects outside of work. Some of that's working with, other organizations in town and just sort of doing some fun stuff. Some of that is like I've been exploring sourdough bread baking for the past year, which has been an awesome little side project. So, yeah.
So that's so fascinating because I think most people would say, oh, the nature of the work that you do is imbued with so much meaning. This must be all fulfilling for you.
Right.
And to hear somebody who is working in a space that is so mission defined, say, the way I find my particular fulfillment is in my side projects.
Yeah, totally. Because I think that at the end of the day, it is still like, it's still work. And I don't find, I've never been able to be especially creative in that kind of structure, in the sort of 9-to-5 office environment. I would presume most folks would agree with that, or would also say, well, you need to find some space, both physical and time, to let your ideas go. And I think the challenge, again, in an office environment, is almost every hour is sort of accounted for, right? Like that's my schedule, it's a meeting, email, lunch, this, and to be creative, to have ideas, like I need 4 hours of uninterrupted time. And so I get many more ideas and things that I enjoy doing while I'm kneading bread or walking in the woods or just finding that space to do it. And I don't think, from the beginning, I didn't expect that. I thought that this would be, People's Liberty would fulfill all of these different desires and needs. But I think it's in my letting go of that I've actually allowed the work just to be the work and not feel like I have to get every little thing out of it.
Yeah.
It's not fair to the work for me to put
expect
that pressure.
it to do everything for you.
Exactly. Let me just be what it is.
I think when we started this podcast, I expected that the conversations with people like Megan would confirm for me that there are jobs out there that are so meaningful that people don't look elsewhere for their fulfillment. And I'm not saying they don't exist, but I am finding over and over again that nothing is what it seems. And even those who do work with the most apparent meaning from the outside still often struggle with issues of settledness and contentment, and that ultimately it's very rare to find someone for whom their professional pursuits satisfy all their sort of personal, creative, or philosophical needs. I guess in retrospect, that's not that surprising, but it's been eye-opening to really see the picture develop over the course of the year. Like Megan, Bart Campolo makes his living, or at least spends his days, creating space for other people. Bart's job is probably one of the most unique professions we featured this year. As the humanist chaplain for the University of Cincinnati, Bart's job is to provide the guidance and the grounding that many students would seek in a spiritual or religious context, but without the underpinning of belief. Bart talked about who he tries to reach, about the misconception that he's trying to convince people not to believe in God. But what he's really trying to do is to convince non-believers of the value of deeper things in how we live our lives.
The people I wanted to evangelize were not the Christian kids. I wanted to get kids that didn't believe in God. And I said, I used to say to a kid, like, so you think this life is the only one that you have? And he would go like, yeah. And I'd go like, so what are you going to do with it? And he would be like, I'm going to be an investment banker. And I'd be like, really? You have one brief moment of consciousness and you're going to make rich people richer?
Right.
I was like, there's so many better things you could do. And so I was trying to get kids who were already secular to sort of buy into the wonder of life and buy into the notion that the way to make the most of your life was by building loving relationships and making things better for other people.
We can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to only do work we love or feel passionate about, to only do work we feel we're good at. But like we said, there are different types of meaning. There's professional satisfaction and societal good, and then there's the type of meaning that only comes from investing in those you love and care about. That balancing act came through loud and clear when we talked with Liz McEwen about her decision to stay home with her kids, to be a stay-at-home mother and homeschool her kids. Liz defies a lot of stereotypes about the stay-at-home mom. She's extremely thoughtful about her choices and her motivations, and her relationship to meaningful work is instructive, no matter what choices we may have made. Liz was very candid about how and why she made the decision to stay home. We talked about the reasons why people would make the decision to homeschool and to stay home with their kids rather than to pursue a career. And you're not doing it under duress. You're not doing it because you have, I think some women do it because they feel shamed to not do it. They live in a tradition, whether it be a conservative religious tradition, whether it be a familial tradition that says, for whatever reason, no, this is the only thing that you're supposed to do. And if you don't love it enough to only do this, then there's something wrong with you.
Well, and I think there's also this idea that like people believe that the women that are doing this, like they had no other option,
Right.
or there was nothing better they could do at their time, or that they
didn't have the
were
skills
made
to do
for this,
anything
or,
else.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
there's nothing better.
Right.
And you know, sometimes I meet or I talk to friends who are kind of like, oh yeah, I'd love to teach my own kids. I just don't feel like I could do it. And I'm like, well, I don't feel like I can do it either. You know?
Yeah.
Like I'm not doing this because I think I'm like the perfect person for the job. Like I
Yeah.
believe in this, and
Yeah.
that's why I do it. And I think that's why it comes back to the idea of work, because if we believe that motherhood and educating your kids and homemaking and all that stuff is like frivolous side work, then who gives a rip who does it? Like hire it out, you
Yeah.
know, assign it to somebody else. But if we believe that there's like something really important, life-giving for a family, for someone to be doing this, then it doesn't matter what else you could be doing. Like you're still doing something important, something valuable, something that when you are, you know, 50 years old and somebody asks you, so what'd you do with your professional career? You can say like, screw my professional career. Like I took care of my family. And that's not to say that it's easy or that I ever feel like I'm qualified to do this, but I know I'm qualified because I have a family, and so I'm.
Do you ever have second thoughts?
I have second thoughts. I mean, not necessarily. I think that if I could go back in time, I would probably do more preparation. You know, I always knew that I wanted kids, but I was not the kind of woman to like dream or fantasize about my family. Like I've just never been that person. So as far as how that actually looked, to like get married and have kids and raise them, like I had no idea what that would look like. And so a lot of it really just has been like stumbling through it. I mean, especially financially. I mean, geez, like I think, you know, and a lot of this is the sign of the times, you know, I mean, the economy of our world is so different than it was when I was even a child, that I think I just had no idea what it required to have, you know, for example, like a primary breadwinner and a stay-at-home mom. Like financially, the economics of that, how does that work out? All that stuff's like such a mystery and takes a long time to work through and is really hard. So stuff like that, I don't second guess the decision. I think like I had no idea how complicated it was. And then also just educating kids. Like I'm not like, I love my children. I enjoy, you know, most of what we do, you know, but I am not like a particularly motherly person. Like there's a whole lot about parenting that I was not prepared for. And so like the daily,
You weren't I'm asking the question. You weren't necessarily a woman that like had grown up taking care of a whole bunch of kids, and then when it came to taking care of yours, you knew exactly what you were doing. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think I think I'm an intuitive person by nature, so I think thankfully I worked through a lot of those things. But yeah, I mean, it's full of surprises, especially as, you know, I tend to be more of a introvert. I need a lot of time alone. You know, being home with four kids, it's not going well. You know, but then even complicating it further with having a husband. I mean, geez, my kids aren't my only, you know, they aren't all that's there for me to, you know, be with. And so it's just, there's a lot of moving pieces, you know, and, so no, I don't regret the decision to do this. I think I just had no idea how ill prepared I was for it, you know, and thankfully it's all, you know, kind of come together.
I've known Liz for a while. Before she got married, we did a lot of shows together as singer-songwriters in Cincinnati. She's been pretty busy since then, but I knew she'd be honest and candid about her life and her decisions, and she didn't disappoint. And that's really the only qualification for being on The Distiller. You don't have to do something exciting. You don't have to be an expert or a master. You just have to have thought about your work to some degree and be willing to dig into it. The consistent candor of our guests is something I have treasured. So many people this year that I didn't know before we sat down together were completely willing to just open up and talk about their motivations and their satisfaction or lack of it, and really investigate this idea of work. For instance, Corbin Bone, a professional soccer player with FC Cincinnati. Corbin and I had never met before our conversation, but he didn't hold back at all. When you examine the lifespan of a career, we've talked about the beginnings, how people get into the work they do. We examine how they pursue mastery, but for some careers, the horizon is always looming. A lot of my conversation with Corbin was about the challenges of being a professional athlete, including the inevitable end of a sports career, the fact that your career depends on your health and your fitness, two things that can change over time or in an instant. But we also talked about how you manage the mental and emotional concerns that might prevent you from achieving your peak. For Corbin, that balance, applying the lessons you only learn from time while still recognizing that time is a finite commodity, this is present in his mind every day, and these are lessons that are applicable no matter what we might do, that our mental state has a deep impact on the work we do and how we bring ourselves to it.
And you mentioned it earlier, the one thing that I do try and provide at all times is that willingness to work and the energy. Yep. and that sort of thing that you can't deny, that I'm going to give you that every time I kind of step on the field.
And I think that's part of it, is that journeyman approach. I mean, it sounds to me the way that you've matured as a player, but as a person over the course of your career is to see it as, I'm here to work. I'm here to put the work in every day. I'm here to put the work in on the field. I'm willing to be the guy that goes out and raises the energy of the team, because that's what we all need to succeed. Right. How has that part of it, the workman aspect of it, changed over the course of your pro career?
Honestly, gratitude. I've started to really, because so many in years past, because so many times I was like thinking of quitting, or should I quit, or doing that. And then now being able to be humbled by the fact that, I mean, I have this journal, and every day, usually when I wake up, I write like, this could be the last practice of your life. Mm-hmm. Because it could. That's, I mean, not only practice, but day or whatever, that goes into this existentialist thing or whatever. Yep. But that this could be, whether it's injuries, whether it's, anything, this could be it. And so that bleeds into, well, I'm going to work my hardest. I'm going to do everything I can, that if this was my last practice, if this was my last game, that I would be happy with that performance. Yep. And so that's kind of, like you said, that came with maturity and kind of recognition and awareness of the limited time that I have with this game and this life, really. And I want to be proud. When I look back, all that stuff I did when I was younger, I want to be proud of my soccer career. Yeah. And so that kind of bleeds into all those, man, this could be it. This could be the last one of the day. This next one that I have, this could be it. So I want to make sure that it's, and so working that hard to be proud of that, that's a big thing that I work towards 100%.
You talked a few minutes ago about the desire to give something to the world, that you think of your career as what you're giving to the world. We talk about, this podcast is about meaningful work, about finding meaningful work and finding meaning in the work that you do. Mm-hmm. Where does that desire come from for you? Because you're obviously, even in the way that you're talking about it right now, you've matured into a position of thinking about this in a larger way, and thinking about it in terms of how this is meaningful to you beyond whether or not you score on Saturday night.
Yeah, 100%. I think for me, I've kind of learned and taken in this idea that the mental side of the game is so much greater, for me at least, than I guess I shouldn't say that. Practicing, and as a youth player, practicing and really honing on your skills is important. But when you get to a certain point, the mental capability or capacity of a person is where you're going to succeed, for me. Mm-hmm. And that's where the game changed. And so for me, I've tried, and I've started to do this now, and I'm a big advocate of it, is the mental side of the game and the mental ups and downs that you can deal with throughout a career, and how that kind of can make or break you 100%. Yeah. And so one of the big things is, I did this speech the other day, and I did 3 takeaways, and one of the takeaways was overthinking. And this applies to soccer and everything, really. Mm-hmm. Is I went down this path for a long time of overthinking, where if I made one bad pass, I go down this rabbit hole of, oh man, you made one bad pass. If you make another bad pass, everyone's going to think you're bad. They're going to take you off the field. Yep. Then you're not going to play the next game, and your career is going to be over. That's just classic overthinking.
That's a slippery slope right there.
100%.
Yeah.
But that's the reality of overthinking, because usually it has a negative connotation. You're going to go and you're going to end up someplace that isn't a reality, but you're there now and you're thinking it. So you made it into something real.
Yeah, you're willing yourself unintentionally into the place.
And so when I realized, and the breakthrough for me was when I became aware of that, I could actually shut that down inside my head. So saying that, what I want to give to the world or show is that you can be a soccer player, but also think outside of the mistakes or the highs and lows of the soccer game. You can actually kind of play with a free-flowing mentality, and no matter what happens during the game, the outcome doesn't really matter. If you can think positively, it's still going to be positive in the end. So it was the self-discovery in a way. I started getting into reading, and so I started reading like self-help books, if you will, and then I applied it to the soccer field, and I ended up becoming a better player because I could play, free-flowingly. I could play without fear, that kind of thing. I think it honestly made me a better soccer player.
Corbin talked about wanting to be proud of his pro career. It's really fun to be able to have these conversations and then see what happens afterwards. So we recorded that conversation in May, about 4 games into the 2018 season. And a lot happened after that conversation. Corbin had a career year. He finished the season with 12 goals and 4 assists. FC Cincinnati was officially invited to join the MLS, and Corbin was one of only 2 players from that original FC Cincinnati squad who signed a contract with the team for 2019, meaning that Corbin's going back to the big leagues, to Major League Soccer. If you listened to that whole episode about Corbin's journey from a college standout, a high MLS draft pick, and then disappointment after disappointment, the redemption of going back to the MLS at this point in his career, after everything he's learned, makes those lessons about mental approach all the more meaningful and inspiring. Congratulations, Corbin. We can't wait to see your MLS return in 2019. So inevitably, these conversations come around to the idea of following your passion. That's an easy thing to say. In fact, it's something that is in a way at the heart of this show. I often tell my friends, my father has only really ever given me 2 pieces of advice that came in the form of fully packaged tablets from the mountain sort of wisdom. One of those was, have kids while you're young enough to enjoy them. We're not going to touch that one here, but I have thoughts, believe me. And the other was, find something you love to do and then find a way to get paid to do it. A few years back, my dad and I were talking. We were having one of those conversations you only get to have when enough time has gone by that you are, as I was, about the same age that my father was when he first gave me that advice. And my dad asked me if I remembered him saying that. And I said, Dad, have you been paying attention? Just about every professional decision I've ever made has been trying to figure that out and live that out. And that really is why I started the show. But that idea, expressed culturally as follow your passion, is complicated. For guest Meredith Shockley-Smith, it meant moving from academia, where she thought she was where she belonged, where she stayed for years to get her PhD, only to find it wasn't the right fit, and take a job in the nonprofit sector for Cradle Cincinnati. Specifically, I loved talking with Meredith about her teenage daughters and how they view that transition, and whether Meredith's risky move mid-career to follow her passion makes it easier to talk with her daughters about how to find work that's meaningful to them. So do you tell your daughters, has the conversation, and I don't know if you're having these conversations with them, they're 16 and 14, I don't know if they're thinking about what they're gonna do, but when you apply this experience to them, do you use the words, do what you love and the money will follow, or is it more complex than that as you're trying to shape what they think they're capable of?
It's really interesting. So I was mentioning both of them on different spectrums of ways of engaging education. So the oldest, who is Sage and is 16, can sing like a songbird. And people have told her, and this sounds like I'm being the mom, stage mom or whatever, but people are like, she has perfect pitch, she should sing. And she's like, singing is not a thing I want to do. Even though I love singing and I'm passionate about it, she's like, that isn't what people do. People are engineers, people are doctors and whatever. So she's like, I need to do this thing. And I'm like, you cannot, why would you want to be a doctor? You pass out literally at the sight of blood. Or like, you know, an engineer would be on a computer sitting down all day and you want to be outside or whatever. So it's just like, these are the kinds of conversations that I think should be also happening in education, where it's like, what are you good at? What do you love? Instead of like, here are the respectable jobs you can and should do. And then you try to fit yourself into that. And I find like that's how you get to a place of misery, where you're like, I'm doing what I should be doing. And should be is never really, I mean, let me not say never. It's rarely, I would imagine.
Right.
Also haven't researched that, but
Yeah.
it's just like these boxes cannot possibly contain all of us. So I think we are having these kinds of conversations. Like, how do you think about passion differently? How do you think about work differently than what we're usually pushed into thinking?
Yeah.
Which I'm working on in myself. I probably wouldn't finish my PhD if I followed my heart. I would have walked away. I probably wouldn't have, stayed in the university if I had followed my heart. But I also didn't know how to think about it differently at the time.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, this is the door, we're walking through it. So I would say take a pause and think about that.
Yeah. My son and I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show before or not, but my son and I talk about these kind of things. And he said to me a couple of years ago, in a moment of childhood brilliance, everybody always says you can do whatever you want to do, but nobody's doing it. And
that is brilliant.
And that ability to, I feel like for everybody at any age, there is a need to be able to visualize something actually taking place before you can.
Absolutely.
And there's a woo-woo sense to that in terms of like bringing things to you, but there's also just the physical, you can't do what you can't imagine. And
so big.
Somebody has to help you imagine something. Somebody has to help, if she were ever to do it, somebody has to help your daughter imagine that an income can be made and a life can be supported by singing.
So reasonable. And then, I mean, somebody said to her, like, there's only one Beyonce. And I'm like, yeah, we're not trying to be Beyonce here. I mean, there are millions of jobs, millions probably a stretch, but lots of jobs around music. It doesn't have to be that you are a traveling star.
Right.
So it's also new to think about what does it look like to do your passion. So that's a whole nother conversation.
Transition is a huge thread throughout the Distiller. Transitions from one employer to another, from one job or career to another. In the same way that we talked about it with Meredith, that idea of being able to imagine something different, of hearing the minutia of someone's process and struggle, came through when I talked with Justin and Tasha Golden. Justin and Tasha recorded and performed for over a decade as the musical duo Ellery before crippling depression kind of decided for them that they wouldn't be able to tour anymore. That was a huge shift that required years to process and to work out and transition into the next phases of their lives. For Tasha, that's meant a PhD in public health that she's just now completing at the University of Louisville. For Justin, that meant transitioning into music and content production for television and producing albums and shows for other people. It's work that they both love now, but that clarity took a long time to develop. We talked about how easy it is to minimize the time and the internal work necessary for others to navigate big transitions. When you look at someone else's process from the outside, it can seem really easy. But it's really important to recognize the painstaking work and time and heartache that goes into shifting from one stream to another, and sometimes to reduce it down to the actual steps needed to move in another direction. And it's like the People magazine article of your last 10 years is Ellery, what are they doing now?
Right.
Oh, Tasha's found her way in public health.
Right.
Justin's making music.
Yeah.
So cool. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's really easy to sort of like see the high points of your process and go, oh, it was easy. They followed their passions. It's like, no, that's not the way it happens.
Yeah, no, not.
It happens with
funny,
intention and planning and hardship and having your dreams taken away from you in ways that you didn't want and weren't happy about and didn't invite. And mourning and grieving for that, and then figuring out like what next and saying, oh shit, well we gotta pay the bills somehow. Okay, I'm gonna go get a job. Like it's really easy to look at somebody else's process and go, oh well, it all works out. They followed their passion and it worked. so much more complicated than that, so much more intentional on your part.
There was a lot of decisions, I think, that at the time didn't feel like a sure thing. No decision ever felt like a sure thing. Everything felt like kind of a vapor. And then 2 years later, we could look back and say, oh, I'm glad we did that.
Yeah.
Wow, neat.
It's important to remember as we talk about meaningful work that the access to so-called meaningful work is different for different people. And even conceptions of what qualifies as meaningful work are different from person to person and even from culture to culture. If you're just trying to put food on the table, looking at following your passion is far from a primary concern. It's important to get those different perspectives. We talked with Melis Aydoğan, a first-generation American. Her parents immigrated to the United States from Turkey before she was born, specifically to give her and her brother a greater breadth of opportunity. In 2018, Melis won a project grant from People's Liberty and the Hale Foundation. Remember back to Megan Trischler earlier in this show from People's Liberty. Melis, with that grant, created Rüya Turkish Coffee House, an authentic Turkish experience in the heart of Cincinnati, as an homage to her culture and an invitation for others to experience its beauty. In her day job, Melis works a corporate job at P&G. And we talked about the differences between those two experiences, and specifically about the differences between the way she and many of her first-generation friends approach work, the different conceptions they had about why they were looking for work in the first place, and how they approached education leading up to finding those jobs. You told me that in college you had a group of friends that were all first-generation Americans, which makes sense because your concerns were the same, your mindset might be similar. And I know you don't want to paint with an overly broad brush, but nevertheless, there's a lot that's common to your experience. As a group, like, what is different about how you approached your education, how you approached the job market, and how you think about your job?
Yeah.
Are you conscious of having a different approach to your work than the perhaps more entitled people that you see around you?
I mean, for me, university was a way to get a job. Mm-hmm. It wasn't this time period of finding myself or this time period to dilly-dally.
Yeah.
Whereas I saw a lot of maybe quote-unquote entitled Americans are like, oh, I don't know my major. And I'm like, you're a junior. Figure it out. Like, what? You're wasting time.
Clock is ticking.
Yeah. So I just saw it as a way to earn money so I could pay back to my parents what they sacrificed and help support them.
That first-generation perspective carried through to my conversation with Anne-Marie Herrera and Luis Laya. Anne-Marie and Luis are Venezuelan immigrants to the United States who fled Venezuela 7 years ago for the safety of their family and their children. We talked about what they brought with them in terms of identity and values that, although they came with almost nothing else, kept them from remaining in poverty and fueled their search for meaningful work and their belief in their worth, their personal worth, despite the challenges of a language and a culture that was initially foreign to them. So you moved here and effectively you are in poverty. You have support from your families, but you're both working low-paying jobs. And it sounds like reasonably quickly, I mean, it had to be agonizingly slow at the time, but you had your sights set on this job will get me to the next thing. What's the difference between the mindset that you had when you were doing those jobs and the person who's doing that job but can't imagine something else and can't somehow envision something better?
Yeah, I can say two things. One thing is you have no option, and you know the difference. You come from a different thing, and you know that you can do it better. So you will not stay on that bad position. And the other one is imagination. Nobody had told me never. You can't do this.
Right.
Nobody. If somebody come and say to me, you can't do that, I will say, watch me. I will do it. I will do it.
It sounds like one of the key elements that you described is that you believed in yourself, that you knew what you were capable of, and that this experience didn't define who you were. And maybe it goes back to the fact that your work had never defined who you were culturally. So maybe that's one of the things that happens when you define yourself by your job, is that if you don't have the job that you want, you lose your identity. Were you ever tempted during that time to sort of give up on yourselves? Did you ever doubt your capability then?
No, well, we couldn't afford that. That's the bare reality. We could not afford to give up. We have 3 kids in high school by that time. They needed support to get through and start college.
Yeah.
And that was a daunting experience. Imagine doing FAFSA for the first time, being a foreigner.
Oh, yeah.
I cried the whole. I still cry sometimes when I have to do it. I still
cried
do it.
when I did it for myself. Yeah.
Taxes. The first time I had to
just
do taxes.
navigating all of these systems.
I said, I'm dumb. I don't understand a thing.
Nobody understands.
No, that's
yes. I realize that now. I feel like I know.
Specialists, they say they are specialists. They have no idea.
Yeah.
So we had no choice. We had to go through, and we knew that one crappy job will lead us to a better one.
Talking about work, about the idea of our work, is such a fertile and deep subject. And getting to have these conversations about once every 2 weeks with people is a privilege. Because I think as we build on these conversations, I am learning that we can't take it for granted. We shouldn't take it for granted because there are so many levels of meaning to the work we do. So many of these conversations inspired me, and none more than my conversation with my good friend Stephen Johnson-Grove. Stephen is a public policy attorney who's working to reform criminal justice policy in Ohio. Stephen does important work that makes a real difference in the lives of individual people every day. He's advocating for those who can't fight for themselves. If you're a podcast listener, you listen to maybe other shows, there are other shows, and you happen to listen to the 3rd season of Serial, which came out this year as well. That season spent a year in the Cleveland courthouse. If you didn't hear it, I highly recommend it. But that setting is Stephen's world. Working for the folks profiled in that series. It's heavy work, but Stephen is a relentless optimist and a fighter for justice. So it's not surprising that when I asked Stephen about the concept of a life's work, he pulled no punches with his response and his characterizing of what's behind the challenges he faces every day in his work.
So the thing that's my life's work is to be cured of the addiction of whiteness. Whiteness is heroin. Even if you're a person of color, of course, you know that you've been affected by white supremacy and the internalized oppression. But for that's less of my business to tell you about. For all the white people listening, I'm here to tell you you're sick, that you're infected with this perspective that it's really strange because the sickness is to be told that you're excellent and normal all the time. And the way that screws you up is that you realize you're not normal, you're not excellent, you screw up, you're kind of mediocre, you make mistakes, you hurt people, but every system around you keeps telling you you're fine and like keep going and do a little bit more of that. And so you're just like having this kind of schizophrenic dissonance between like every system, banking, economics, employment, education, religion, everything is telling you you're the normal one. And that's an insane burden to carry. And it will really screw you up, as it has screwed me up. And it takes a while to sort of realize that that's why you're having the problems you're having. Frantz Fanon was an amazing writer, and I encourage everyone to read him. But one, and I don't purport to be an expert at all, but one thing that I appreciate from Frantz Fanon and others is to realize that like all the psychotherapy we put ourselves through only gets you so far unless you like grapple with like the social structures that are creating your psychological problems. Mm-hmm. So you can't talk therapy your way out of whiteness. You have to get engaged in deep, transformative social change, even if it like feels like enormous and unlikely to win and all that stuff. Like that's the only way you get better, is to actually have real relationships with diverse people, especially to reverse the sickness, which is like whiteness is the norm and the good and the excellent and the top and the center and the lead and always in charge. And then by analogy, black is always the opposite. It is the bottom. It is the marginal. It is the wrong. It is the bad. Like that lie. We eat, sleep, drink, and breathe everywhere we go every day. And so like walking upstream against that is the only way to get healed. And you can't do that privately. I mean, you need to do private work. You need to read and think. You know, you can't go around just asking everybody like, what do I do? What do I do? But like that's my life work. And it just takes the form of a lawyer working on a ballot initiative in Ohio.
Yep. When we spoke very early in 2018, Stephen was just about to start the process of gathering signatures to get an initiative on the ballot in Ohio to reform prison spending, penalties for minor drug crimes, and to address the discrimination inherent in our prison system. That initiative did make it onto the ballot in November and was the hot political issue in Ohio in the 2018 elections. Unfortunately, it did not pass, but the groundwork that was laid, the conversation that was started, will continue and has continued to change lives, and Stephen remains in the heart of it. One of the things we talked about in that episode was a reading list that Stephen gave for educating yourself about these issues if you want to know more. And that reading list is still on our website on the page for episode 5 with Stephen. It includes Frederick Douglass, James Baldwin, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and more. And if you're interested, I invite you to listen to the whole episode and start working your way through that list as I have this year. That conversation with Stephen about his life's work dovetails perfectly with the time I spent with Cincinnati City Council member Tamaya Denard. As a gay Black woman who was raised in poverty with a mother who was in and out of jail, Tamaya represents many of the most marginalized segments of our society. And when I say represents, I mean literally represents them every day as she sits on the council. It was important to me in the light of my conversation with Stephen about the pervasiveness of prejudice and about the huge need to educate ourselves about our hidden prejudice and privilege, to speak with Tamaya about the forms of discrimination she experiences every day, forms that much of society, including myself, have a hard time even imagining simply because we don't walk in her shoes.
It actually becomes almost subconscious because I'm so used to dealing with it. I've never not dealt with it, even talking about the campaign. We raised a good amount of money, but African-American women don't generally raise money running for office. That's because we don't have the social capital.
The network
to do so. So for me, I can't tell you how do you become aware? Only thing I could say is listen, be open to understanding that there's varying degrees of privilege. What I try to do in talking about that, because there's privilege that you have, but I also understand there's privilege that I have as well. Even though, my mom was locked up, I still have my grandmother. There's still plenty of people who their parents go to jail or prison and they don't have anybody. So I always try to recognize what my privilege is. At the same time, I'm always looking to educate. When we did our swearing in this week, I had my red folding chair.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
And that was something that, for me, a lot of people, and I took advantage of the moment. I was in a room with people, some of whom knew who I was, some didn't. And I talked about, when you're the majority in the room, if everybody in the room is white, that's a problem. And so I try to educate, not berate or beat people over the head with it, because they're going to cut you off and not listen. But if I go into a room and it's full of people, let's say I'm going to Chamber of Commerce, and I know history tells me that room is also going to be white men. Because, I have to talk about privilege, but I don't lead with that, because if I lead with that, even though it's true, I can't lead with it because the room will not listen to what I have to say. And so that's why I try to take advantage to educate. And at the same time, I'm always trying to be educated and learn, because we've all evolved in terms of our social awareness and our social consciousness. But my goal is always to educate. So I tell people all the time, I'm a social justice warrior. I love a good protest. But at the end of the day, is your goal to demonize, or is your goal to move the ball forward? Is it to move the needle? And so if your goal is to move the ball forward or move the needle, then you are going to take a stance of education as opposed to just, insults and telling people, they're racist or they're bigots or whatever. So I think a lot about, my approach and, how I say things, when I say things, and the way I deliver things.
There are so many more moments we could play, but maybe the most important thing at this point is to take a look at what we've learned in this first year of The Distiller, the perspective we're gaining through these conversations. I've chosen to end the show here with Stephen and Tamaya specifically because these conversations are increasingly political. Sure, they're fun, they're interesting, they're often inspiring, but they're also concerning. when we realize that if we're going to talk about meaningful work, we can't do so without acknowledging that even thinking about meaningful work is a privilege that many people don't have when they're simply trying to put food on the table. And so that brings us to the close of year one of The Distiller. Looking back, I am so proud of what we've done, and maybe most of all, that original idea, Justin's challenge to present these conversations and dig into these ideas about work, is really what we've done. Yeah, there are things we haven't really figured out yet. In particular, how to represent the perspectives that are harder to pull out, those of the disabled, retirees, marginalized voices. It's really important that we not eliminate these voices as we think about what meaningful work means in the context of today's America and today's world. And that's a goal for year two of The Distiller. And there's also the idea of, how is this different in America than the rest of the world? How does the American conception of work differ from our neighbors? And what might we have to learn from them that could make us happier, more productive, more fulfilled, personally and professionally? One of the inevitable results of talking with people regularly about their work is that you start to build a patchwork quilt that, when you step back and look from a distance, really is a picture of a collective vision and understanding of work and meaning, and we are starting to see that take shape. Finally this year, thank you for listening. There are a ton of podcasts out there, and a lot of them are really great. I treasure that The Distiller has made its way into your life and that you're finding these discussions somehow meaningful as well. Thank you for listening in 2018, and I sincerely hope you'll join us for year two. We've already got a pretty great guest list taking shape for 2019, starting with a conversation with singer-songwriter Kim Taylor in the first week of January, so I hope you will join us. And don't forget, just because these interviews happened months ago, they're all still available on our website, on iTunes, or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's the beautiful thing about this format. If you find a show you love, you can just go back, like Netflix, and binge the whole thing. I hope you're finding some value, dare I say, some meaning in what we're doing. And I hope you'll listen in the year to come. The Distiller is produced, recorded, and hosted by me, Brandon Dawson. We've had production and booking assistance this year from the wonderful Terry Heist, who's made everything run on time. Justin Golden not only provided that initial push of inspiration for the show, he also mixes and edits our shows from his home in Louisville, where he and Tasha live with their 2 cats. Justin is for hire for audio mixing and production for just about anything related to making stuff sound great. You can contact Justin through his website at justingolden.com. Scott Ryan designed our iconic logo. If you need design or logo creation experience, contact us through the website and we'll put you in touch with Scott. And our videos are created by my longtime friend and collaborator, Mike Helm of Minute Moments Pictures. Likewise, if you're looking for animation or video expertise, I'd be happy to put you in touch with Mike. You can always find The Distiller and listen to any of this year's episodes wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and more. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to make sure you're notified when new episodes are released. If you've enjoyed today's show or any of our shows so far, please leave us a rating or a review where you listen. That helps other people find out about The Distiller. And if you do want to help us out, tell other people about The Distiller. One easy way is to follow, like, and share our posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Remember, you can also listen, download, subscribe, and find more information about every show, as well as a map of everywhere we've recorded an episode on our website at thedistillerpodcast.com. You can also get in touch with us to let us know how we're doing, to suggest a guest or a location, or just to say hi by emailing us at mail@thedistillerpodcast.com. But whether by email, through the website, or on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn, we always love to hear from you. Until next year, I'm Brandon Dawson. Thanks for listening to The Distiller. Bye-bye.